Are we ready? Ready, good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins, President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and it is such a pleasure to welcome you today for our 2022 Summer Survivor Speaker Series. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our community partners for this series: Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star, Legacy Senior Communities, Mosaic Family Services, Refugee Services of Texas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Shalom, and the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We are very grateful for their support of our museum and our programs. I'd also like to give a big welcome to our museum members and volunteers and a board member who are here today. We couldn't put on programs like this without you, and I appreciate all you do to support the museum. If you are not a museum member or a volunteer and are interested in getting engaged, please go to our website and check out both of those. We'd love to have you join our member or volunteer family. So today you are in for a big treat. You will hear from Bert Romberg, who was born in Astheim, Germany in 1930. When Bert was 8 years old, his mother arranged for the family to escape to England by obtaining a visa for herself and securing spots for Bert and his sister Magie on the Kindertransport, a rescue mission that allowed thousands of Jewish children to escape Nazi Germany and live with English citizens. In just a moment, Bert will share his story with you, and then we'll have time for questions and answers from the audience. If you're joining us in person today, our staff will walk around with note cards and pencils, so please feel free to write down your question and we'll collect them and answer as many of them as possible. And if you're watching virtually, and I think Bert's big sister Maggie is watching virtually, so hello Maggie, you can put your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So without any further ado, it is my great privilege to introduce Bert Romberg.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the applause. Before we talk about the first 15 years of my life, I made a couple of notes that I'd like you to think about, talk about when you leave here, and remember. We're talking about the first half of the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, a perilous time where you had recession, you had depression, you had meanness caused by hardship. You have similar situations today. We have climate-induced crop failures. People are starving. People are moving. We have waves of new refugees like we had in the 30s when we had to flee. You have, in these times, you have gangsters, ruthless, unscrupulous politicians rise to the surface, take power. It's happening again, or it can happen again. So I want you to keep that in mind. Let me give you some examples. Mr. Orban from Hungary, a rather mean-spirited politician, is going to speak this coming weekend in Dallas. We had a scion of the Marcos family has become the new democratically elected president of the Philippines. His parents robbed that country. And this is happening over and over again, and it's caused by discontent of the population. And we have refugees coming across our border. We're not welcoming them, but they're still coming. And it's happening all over. Keep that in mind, because there are similarities to what we experienced in the early in the first half of the last century, 75, 80 years ago. The other thing I want to tell you, you're going to hear about the Kindertransport, a wonderful event, one of the few good stories that end happily that came out of the Second World War, out of this terrible catastrophe, which is the subject of this museum. But keep in mind, although it saved 10,000 children, of whom I was one and Sister Maggie was one, 6 million people died in 6 years, of which there were 1.5 million kids, just like we were. Just think about this. Part of my story, which I tell to high school children, I put them through a little arithmetic. You will know that 10,000 children survived and because of the Kindertransport. This museum will tell you that of the 6 million Jews who died, they didn't die, they were killed. They were murdered. 1.5 million were children. So if you do the arithmetic, you do a simple fraction, 10,000 in the numerator, and 1.5 million in the denominator. And those of you who are taking algebra or arithmetic, you know how to simplify that fraction. You take the zeros out of the top and out of the bottom, and it becomes a very simple fraction, 1 over 150. What does it mean? For every one of us that got out on the Kindertransport, 150 kids died. Think about that. So you're going to hear my story, which ends well, because I'm here. And Maggie ends well, because she's listening to me. And I'll hear about it when I see her later. But it's a small part of this very, very tragic story. Okay. So here we go. You will see on the screen above you a travel map. It's roughly, the blue line is roughly the journey that I'm talking about Maggie, my mother, and myself, we traveled from middle 1939. Yes, dear.
Will you click the slide so we can see the map? Will you click that slide for us so we can see the map?
Would I do what?
You gotta click that slide for us. Remember the right-hand button here.
Oh.
You got it.
I got it. Well, the map is up there. Okay. I see. Okay, I'm sorry. You see the blue line? It's roughly our journey that took us from middle 1939 until April 1945 from the little town called Astheim in the bottom right till we took a steamer out of Scotland to Halifax to Canada, eventually to New York, and various stops along the way. Let's see now. Whoop. This is a picture of our parents' marriage. You'll see the bride and the groom and a little guy standing there who shows up later. But those people are what were our closest relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins. There were probably 40 people. This was in a small village. There were some 40 people probably. This is in our backyard. The house is our backyard. In the small village at the bottom right, Astheim, Germany. Probably at the time, no more than a couple of hundred families. We and one other family, the Strausses, were the only Jews there. We lived there until I was probably 5, Maggie probably 6, 1935, 1936. What happened during the time we lived there, you heard I was born in 1930. In 1932, in times of depression worldwide, and Germany was probably suffering worse than most, families could not make a living. The German currency was ruined. The economy was basically a barter economy. If you had a pair of new shoes that you weren't using, you might be able to trade that for a week's worth of food. This kind of thing, and it caused terrible discontent. And along came a party, along came a politician who claimed that he could lead that country out of its misery. His name you probably have heard. His name was Hitler, Adolf Hitler. And in the middle 20s, some 10 years before, he formed a party, the National Socialist Party, Nationalsozialisten, abbreviated to Nazi. That party, little by little, gained more adherents. He told us a wonderful story. He blamed other people for Germany's misery by other people who didn't look like the traditional German. Jews, Slavs, black people, brown people, all were in his category of what's called Untermenschen, lower people. And his main targets were the Jewish German citizens. Some 400,000, 450,000, roughly 1% of the German population. Anyway, in a democratic election, that Nazi party gained not quite a majority, but they bargained with other smaller splinter parties. They either bargained or bludgeoned them into joining. And that coalition ended up with a majority, and he became the chancellor, the equivalent of our president. So very quickly after the Nazi Party took over, early in 1933, they came out with 2 regulations. I don't know that they were voted on, but those regulations came into force. One was a little bit complicated. It in effect said, you good Germans, you people who aren't black or brown or Jewish or Slavs or whatever, but you who belong to us, national Germans, you shouldn't be doing business with the people who are unfriendly to us, even though they live among us. And the main target were the German Jewish population. And more, we, the Jews, became targets of this hatred and propaganda. And you have people here in this country talking the same way. It said, you shouldn't be doing business with Jews. You shouldn't help them. You shouldn't buy from them unless you have to. If you have to, try not to pay them very much. Try not to pay them at all. And if you owe them money, you don't have to pay them back. And we, the government, which is now the Nazi Party, will see to it that no policeman, no judge, no prosecutor, no jury will take the part of a Jew against you. Right there, in middle 1933, we Jews in Germany lost most of our civil rights with that law. The other one, which really affected our little family, it said no Jewish child will attend a public school. Now that hit our mother, who by that time was widowed because our father died when I was not quite 4 and Maggie was not quite 5. That regulation, combined with our business, the business that my mother inherited from our grandfather, that business falling apart because she couldn't collect her debts from the local people, forced her to think about moving. So by 1935, she had to get out of there. Unfortunately, we had a very good neighbor who bought our property, that house where you saw the backyard, that house and its surrounding property. And she probably got enough money for that to move us to Eschwege, the next stop you'll see, the next dot on that map. Eschwege, a town some, 50, 60 kilometers away, where her next oldest sister had moved with her family. And she figured Eschwege was a rather larger place. It was a market town, probably had 25,000 people compared to the 2,000 that were in Astheim. She figured that was more cosmopolitan, and this terrible Nazi propaganda, which was centered on her because she was sort of a prominent Jewish citizen in the little town, that she would be below the radar in Eschwege, and we wouldn't suffer so badly from this rabid anti-Semitism that the Nazi Party was promulgating. In any event, she was right for a couple of years. 1936, 1937, we went to school in Eschwege. I'm going a little fast because we're going to run out of time. I'll come back to some of these pictures in a while. The picture you'll see up there, that picture shows us in Eschwege. The two kids on the bottom are still in Astheim on the top. Those are probably passport photos for us to go to get out of there. But the picture on the right is the apartment house where Mama found a place for us. And you'll see that little guy with his hair combed and a clean shirt, probably the first time. Probably had his ears cleaned out for the first time in a long time. And the little girl behind him. That probably was my first day in school. And that cravat and a nice white shirt was a typical uniform for kids' first day in school. So Maggie went into first grade and I went into kindergarten, probably in 1936. And we lived, and Mother she kept herself busy by taking in sewing for neighbors, and she still had some money, I assume, from selling the house. So we did reasonably well in Eschwege until 1938, 1939, the Nazi Party really took hold, and it became intolerable to live there. Maggie remembers better than I do. We would go to school, we'd come home crying because the neighborhood kids were, although they should have been our friends, they were bullying us and probably throwing our lunch pails in the gutter, and our books were destroyed. And we'd come home crying, but there was nothing to do about it because probably those kids were being encouraged by the neighborhood policeman to beat up on us. Anyway, in 1939, or in late 1938, a terrible event struck the German Jewish community, and it was called the Kristallnacht. Kristall is a combination of two German words. German language is full of combined words, where one word tells you a story that you would take a chapter or a paragraph to describe. Kristall is crystal, is crinkling, it's crackling under your feet, and it signifies glass being destroyed from Jewish property. It was an organized 24-hour event organized by the Nazi Party nationwide, every village, every town, every city, where mobs destroyed Jewish property and ransacked stores, ransacked businesses, burned down synagogues, even went into people's apartments, stole and destroyed things. And the worst part of that night was that Jewish men, 18 years and older, were kidnapped and taken to concentration camps. And it was the first time that the world heard names like Buchenwald, Dachau, Gross-Rosen. Names, beautiful names for terrible places. Places where people were sent to be brutalized, to be terrorized. And most men were eventually released, but came out with awful memories. Some men never did come out. They died there. And it was the Germans' first experiment with mass concentration and extermination. And the world was horrified, but they didn't do anything about it. The German Jewish population was terrified. But the world was busy with its own problems. And like today, nobody needs or nobody wants a refugee. Nobody needs or nobody wants a refugee because we got problems of our own. We don't have enough work for our own people. These are not our kind. They're not going to do you any good. We don't need them. We don't want them. Have you heard that song before? Anyway, German Jews were lined up at consulates in every major city where there was a consulate. America, Canada, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, desperate to find places to go, and nobody wanted us. And particularly in England, which was the world's first trade union country, where the unions controlled the vote and the government. Don't send us anymore. We have our own depression. We can't feed our own families. We don't need new competition with refugees. So a few of the Jewish population got out. We had an aunt and uncle that came out before this in 1934, 35, and settled in New York. But most thought it would blow over. The Nazi Party would get voted out eventually, etc., but it never did. In the meantime, we were being persecuted. And the British newspapers, there was no television, but they had radio and newspapers. They heard about this. And a small sect in England called the Quakers, a Christian sect, thought we should try to do something about it. They sent a small delegation to Germany to find out what was going on. And these people, 4 or 5 of them, came back and told their congregations, it's worse than you're seeing in our newspapers. There is no future for Jewish people in Germany, and we have to do something. So they combined with some Jewish relief organization in England, petitioned Parliament to let Jewish refugees come to England, and Parliament said no. We got our own problems. If we let refugees in the next election, we're out of here. Well, the Quakers persisted. Took a couple of weeks or a few weeks, I don't know how long. And they came out with an agreement with the government which said, you can bring kids to England, 15 years and younger, they won't take our jobs. But you, the Quakers, have to guarantee that you will see that these children, whoever you bring out, are clothed, are housed, are fed, and are educated at your cost, at no cost to the British Treasury. And the Quakers said, if that's the best we can do, we'll take that. And they managed to station trains at 4 locations in Germany and in Austria. I'm not sure you can see it on this map, but they stationed them at, I don't believe there, that map in the bottom left, the red part is Germany and Austria and part of Czechoslovakia. Austria had by that time been annexed to Germany and had its own Nazi party, more vicious even than the German Nazi party. And part of Czechoslovakia, called the Sudetenland, had been semi-annexed. So they stationed trains at Berlin, the capital of Germany, Frankfurt, the number 2 city in Germany, Vienna, the capital of Austria, and Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia, where there were large Jewish populations. And Jewish families who heard about this, which by that time had been called the Kindertransport, translated, Kind is a German word for child, Kinder is its plural, so it's children. Transport is the name, what you all understand, it's motion. So it's the shipment of children. This became the Kindertransport. Trains of kids taking them along that blue line from Germany through Holland to England. In any event, the Kindertransport started in late 1938, right after Kristallnacht, and lasted until August 1939, or July 1939, in which time trains took 10,000 children. Now picture this. It was on a limited budget and a limited amount of people in England who were willing to take these kids and foster them. So at the platforms in these German cities where the trains were waiting, a family of 3 or 4 children would arrive, and they were told only 1 or at most 2, because we, the Quakers, don't have the budget. Think about such a family right there on that train platform, having to make the decision who goes and who stays. Who goes for a potential future unknown? Who stays for a miserable future, also unknown, but unknown as to how badly it would get? Those parents had to make that decision. In any event, of the Jewish families who went there with their children, many didn't even hear about the transport, or they were too far away. But those who got there had to make that decision, and we, who by that time were living in Eschwege, not too far from Frankfurt, Mama heard about it, and she figured, maybe I can get my kids on there. Maybe I can go with them, because at that time she had a cousin who had gotten to England, who had made some money, and obviously we now know had a little bit of clout, because money does a lot of things, especially in the bureaucracy that issues passports and visas and such. And shortly before that time, had gotten her, my mother had corresponded with him, a visa to England. Let me show you what a visa is. This is a photocopy of it. And it says, refugee to be admitted to the United Kingdom on condition that she does not enter any employment other than as a resident in service in a private household. Translate that for you. It says, Mrs. Romberg, if you come to England and you need to work, you're not going to find any occupation other than as a housemaid in a household. And here she is with two little snot-nosed kids wanting to go to England and not knowing what household is going to take her with two kids. So she figured Kindertransport. Smart lady, the hero of this whole story. Commonsensical smart. So she took a chance. She took us to the train. She went on there with it. She has a visa to England. Precious document. 400,000 Jews couldn't get a visa anywhere. She's got one. So she's on the train with us. That's how we got out. Okay? Now, picture on the left is the Kindertransport. Top left is probably Holland, where the ferry terminal is on the way to England. And those are the kids being led across to the boat. The picture on the bottom right, two little kids, that's not Maggie and I, but that's probably how we looked. We had a number, we were Bert Romberg, number 1300 and whatever. And the picture on the right is obviously arrival in England with our baggage and our tags. And the reason we know it's England, you see this guy on the right with a funny hat? That's an English bobby, a policeman. So that's a typical picture in April, May, June 1939 of arrival in Harwich, which is the ferry terminal in England and services London. So that's that got us there in end of May 1939, and 8 weeks later, the war breaks out, and there's no more communication between England and the continent, separated by the North Sea and the English Channel. And we are in England. Mother immediately gets occupation as a housemaid, and we're turned over to the Kindertransport. They find a billet for us in Coventry, Middle England. You see that town in the center of England? It's an industrial town. It's the Motor City of England, like Detroit here. Maggie is taken in by a family called Simon, a Jewish family who have 2 children, a couple of years older than she is, and they do what they're asked to do. They house her, they feed her, they clothe her, and they send her to school. But they also begin to make her into their housemaid. By the time she's 11 and a half years old, she's cleaning their bathroom, doing their laundry. She didn't have a very good time of it, but she was with them for 4 years. But they kept the bargain, and today she's here. She has children. She has 2 beautiful grandsons. So the bargain wasn't too happy those 4 years, but she survived. I had a much better time of it. I landed with a family called Shepherd, a non-Jewish family. I was with them for 3 years, 1939 to 1942, and they embraced me. They had 2 children of their own. Peter, who was a couple of years older than I, probably 10 or 11, and Mary, a couple of years older than he, so she was 13, probably 14. And they loved me. Poor family, not a poor family, a working family. They had jobs. The man was a postman, letter carrier. The lady of the house, Miriam, was a barmaid in the pub down the street. And they took care of me. And Mary, the older child, was delegated to teach me English. Here's this stupid little German refugee who couldn't talk anything but German. So she started teaching me German. And I remember she daily, twice a day or whenever, would stand me in front of a clock that they kept on their mantelpiece, which they kept 10 minutes ahead, like I do with my car clock, so I'm not late to come to gigs like this. And she would say every time, now remember, this clock is 10 minutes fast, or 10 minutes fast. And that's the first sentence, first English sentence. I understood you could put these unknown words together and make yourself understood. And that was the first German. Now, that was the beginning of learning a foreign language where we didn't hear any German thereafter. I mean, we were immersed in the local community. The shepherds sent me to school. Simon sent Maggie to school. And we quickly, I'm talking about in the space of a few weeks, we became fluent in English. And I became a regular English kid. I had friends down this. The shepherds were so good to me. They gave me piano lessons. Big mistake, because I was no good at it. They did things like, if one of the kids up the street went to visit his grandma in the country, shepherds would ask his parents if they could borrow his bicycle so I could learn to ride a bike. They were really, really good to me. I have many stories like that, so I was very happy there. That was 1939, 1940, and the war had been going on for nearly a year, and the Germans decided we're eventually going to have to conquer England, but we will soften it up by bombing it. And the first major bombing run was Coventry, and the name was Blitz. Coventry was blitzed. That's not a football term. That's a term of mass destruction, the Blitz. And we were in I was in Coventry, Maggie was in Coventry, our mother was in London in household service, and for weeks she didn't know the condition of her kids. Of course, Coventry was destroyed, no phone. Even if there were a phone, we couldn't afford it. We corresponded by postcard. But we survived there, and the problem was, by the time 1941, 1942, it became time, or Mama realized it became time for me to become bar mitzvah. I assume many of you know what a bar mitzvah is, but for those of you who don't, bar mitzvah is an occasion in a Jewish family's life where the child nearing 13 at 13th birthday becomes eligible to join the adult congregation. And to do that, we have to study. We have to learn from the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew, lengthy tracts. And we have to learn that, and we need a teacher to teach us how to learn it and recite it. And we recite it at or near our 13th birthday to the congregation to prove that we're eligible. Coventry is just, the center of Coventry is destroyed. The shepherds had sent me to religious school and to Hebrew school religiously. But that didn't happen anymore because the synagogue was destroyed. The rabbi and the Hebrew teacher were probably in the service. And Mama has this dilemma of her little boy becoming 12 and then 13, has to learn for his bar mitzvah. She goes to the Refugee Society and she wants to know if they can find a place where I can learn from my bar mitzvah. They found a place in Hartford. Let's go back to the map. Anyway, in Hartford, just above London, is a place where the Jewish orphanage, a prestigious, small, well-funded orphanage, was evacuated to get their kids out of the Blitz into the countryside. And Hartford accommodated those 60 or 70 kids. And they were billeted there also on local families. In London, the Jewish orphanage had its own building and dormitories, but in Hartford, we were billeted out. And I went there in early 1942, or in late 1942, to learn for my bar mitzvah, and at the same time continue my secular education. And a fortunate event, and I tell you again, I had a great time in England. Lucky, 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 all the way along. London County Council controlled the orphanage. It was part of the London, very wealthy county, and a wonderful school system. And they had competitive scholarship exams called the 13ths, the 13ths and the 15ths, two two dates in a young person's school life, because at that time, public school in Britain at 15 ended. At 15, if you were 15 and you didn't have any prospects, you were out working. You were sent to the coal mines or wherever. But if you were bright enough and you won one of these scholarships, you got admitted to a series of what it's called grammar schools, which were higher schools, semi-higher education, and the first step in the English university system. And I was fortunate enough to land with a London County Council school, which was the orphanage. I was the number 2 child ever to get a scholarship from the orphanage. And I joined the Battersea Grammar School, a London school also belonging to the London County Council, and also evacuated there. Now, tell you how good this was. I am billeted with another wonderful family, like the Shepherds. These were the Pettits in Hartford, and they also were poor. The man was asthmatic, so he was never drafted. He was a grocery clerk, and she helped in the grocery once in a while. They had one child who was an infant. I became his babysitter so she could work. And they took care of me, wonderful care of me. And I went to Battersea Grammar School now. During the day and on weekends and evenings, I would study my Hebrew and eventually get my bar mitzvah done at the orphanage. Battersea Grammar School. Listen, kids. Our curriculum, 1 week, 5 days, and a half-day Saturday, 8:30 to 5:30. And we would have, at the same time in 1 week, 3 maths, algebra, geometry, trig, 3 sciences, bio, chem, physics, 3 English, spoken, mostly debating, writing, and literature, geography, civics, something like politics and such, history, 2 histories, English and world history, all at the same time. Not 5 days a week, but 2 to 3 hours. And 1 half day, because it was wartime, and most of the able-bodied people were in the Army, or in the Navy, or in the Air Force. So our school volunteered us to work on the farms, so we were picking potatoes or whatever it was. So instead of a sports day, we were working on the farms. But it was a great time for a 12-year-old. Boy, was I living it up. I was an English kid. I was fed well. We had the Shepherds, the Pettits, because they worked in a grocery store. We had ample food. Lucky Bert Romberg. But the luckiest part was the education. That education. How many youngsters do we have here? We've got to have a bunch full. I got to tell you, if somebody wants to teach you something, you sit up, you listen, and you ask for more, because it's good for you. It'll be good for your family. You hear me? You know, don't just laugh. I'm serious about that. That early education stood me well the rest of my life. When we came to America, I was not quite 15. I got into middle sophomore year. I was light years ahead in math and arithmetic and in history and in English. Not so good in language because most of my friends now had Latin or had Spanish. By the way, in England, I was learning Latin and Greek, as well as French, as well as English, all in the same curriculum. But the education was phenomenal. Let's see, we're running a little short on time. I'll cut it short. We'll go a little faster. You'll see pictures of the Blitz. You see here, London during the Blitz. There on the left side. That's probably the streets of London, where the street itself is pretty clear, but the smoke is still coming from a burning building, and down below a family sitting in front of their ruined house. The next picture on the right, this is correspondence that Maggie and I had from England, from Coventry, to our family in New York, because America didn't get into the war until the end of 1941. Britain had been in the war with Germany already 2 years, and Britain was starving because the Germans sent their U-boats to the Atlantic to cut off British commerce, and Britain is an island nation dependent very highly on its food products from overseas. And our family in London, in New York, sent us goodie packages, sausage and chocolates and such. And Maggie, that's her handwriting, which is better than it is now, sends her this letter thanking them and in effect asking, couldn't you send a few more chocolates? So by this time, this is 1941 or 42, she's well versed in English. The picture on the right, that one, the yellow one, is a scheme devised by the British Red Cross. They realized they had all these German refugees who had left family on the continent. And they devised a scheme with the German Red Cross. And you see those black stamped words, Deutsches Rotes Kreuz, German Red Cross. They said to us, refugees, we've made an arrangement with the German Red Cross for this form letter. You can fill it out and send us a couple of pounds sterling, and you can have a little message on there. We'll send it to the German Red Cross. They will look for your relatives at the last known address that you have, and they can write on the back, and they send it back to us. You'll know what condition they're in. So this says in German, this is my mother writing, Liebe Mama, dear mother, she's writing to my grandmother, whom we left in a senior citizens home in Frankfurt. Liebe Mama and Paula and Margot, which is an aunt and a cousin of mine that were left over there, who never survived. It goes well with me. Our children, Gretel and Bertie, are in school, and it also goes well with them. Signed, Sita. Kisses, Sita, which is my mother. And it's addressed to Rothschild Katinka, which is my grandmother, at an address in Frankfurt. And it comes back on the back page, is this very Germanic script, which is hard for us to read, but in effect says, we're fine, and she signs it with her name, Katinka. And it's very unusual because we always called her Oma. And I have to think that this is scripted by somebody for her. And she never got this. So it's a phony. Anyway, and the one on the right, the other one, this one here is presents, a list of presents that I got for my bar mitzvah. It has things like, oh, let me take a look. It has things like, I got a wallet from Auntie Erna. I got 10 shillings from Mr. and Mrs. Bloom. Somebody gave me a briefcase. Somebody gave me a pocket knife. All the things that a 13-year-old would like. So that was, and a set of Torah, a set of books for my bar mitzvah. And the one on the right, this is for you kids. That's a yearbook from the Battersea Grammar School the year after I left. Unfortunately, my name isn't in there. It wouldn't be in there anyway because I didn't graduate. But you'll see the Battersea Grammar School. It has a motto. See the motto around the flag? It says, rather death than false of faith. Can you imagine going to a school that has a motto like that? Where's a youngster? Does your school have a motto? Does your school have a mascot?
Yeah.
What is it?
White tiger. White tiger.
A what?
White tiger. Tiger.
A tiger. Oh, that's nothing. we have, you see that eagle on his chest? That's a phoenix. You know what a phoenix is?
Yeah.
Okay. But we also have a patron saint to our school. That's St. John. That's the guy that slew the dragon. You see it? See the dragon down there? St. John. That's a hell of a massive. I mean, we're well protected. Much more than the tiger. Okay? So all of that in addition to getting an education. We got an insurance company. Okay. Anyway, that's sort of a shortcut. That's a good story. The rest of it is this travel map. I could tell you a whole bunch of other things, but we're running out of time. We eventually got together again in Frankfurt to take the train. No, we got together again in London. We reunited in London for the first time in 6 years. Took the train to Scotland, and we left from Glasgow with a steamer, a British liner that took us to Halifax, Scotland. And from there, we took the train to New York. That was 1945. I've left out a lot, but that's the basis. So here we are. I'm talking to you. Maggie is listening to me. I'll catch her comments later. And we have time for a few questions. So if somebody has some questions that are not too... Can you help us out with that? Mary Pat's going to read your questions, those of you whose handwriting is legible.
Bert, where do you think your mother found such strength in the face of such hardship?
I've thought about that a lot. I remember her as a very calm, competent individual. In effect, she was far from calm, but she was very competent. Can you imagine what she went through? Weeks when she didn't know we were alive, when she has no idea of what's happening to her mother and her sister and she has to make these huge decisions. We went to England with nothing. We came to America after 6 years in England with, between us, maybe $10 and 2 suitcases, 2 cardboard suitcases of old clothes. That's what we started with. So my memory of her, total common sense, competence, and non-complaining guts. Just fortitude.
She's the hero in this story.
She
That's what
is.
you said, yes. What inspires you to share your story, Bert?
Well, I told you at the beginning, I want you to reflect on what went on in Germany as a serious omen for what could happen here. That's the first thing. Second thing, I want the children to remember to do their job. Your job is to learn. Her job is to pay for it. Okay? Because that's how a family thrives. Do your job, even though you're little. Okay? Primarily, that's it. And the other thing is, in this journey, there were many people that paid for it. We never know who. So we owe them. So that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I think we'll end there. And if you have questions and would like to come up and ask Bert, are you able to stay for just a little
hang
bit?
around.
I think he'd be happy to do that. For those of you that were already going throughout the museum, you see that we start with the definition of an upstander, and the families that took Bert in exemplified upstander behavior, and we're so grateful to them for who you are today. So I'm
Yes.
glad you're here, and so wonderful to hear your inspiring story.
I want you to know this. I'm a refugee. We have repaid that debt in taxes far more than anybody ever spent. And that's what refugees do. So when they come here, help them out. Put them through school. Invite them over for pajama parties with your kids. Okay? Because they'll be good neighbors. They'll pay their way eventually.
Thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you, Bert.
Former here, if you'd like to.